Oscillators. 8 of them. I hope that answers your question. No, but really, they are just oscillators. Quite a few people asked, what are those things to the left? And by that I mean 2, so here's your answer. They're just oscillators. The bank of 8 can all generate a sine wave, which you can obviously tune to whatever frequency you like. And the 4 on the right are a slightly later model, which can do a square wave as well, which is very useful, having a few different flavours of wave. The units themselves are between £20 and £70 from places like eBay. Very common. They were available in abundance, I believe, in the 1950s, so it means that very early tape experimenters in the UK probably would have had access to this kind of thing. Specifically this unit, a slightly later version was used by the BBC Radiophonic Workshop to generate pure sine tones that were then recorded to tape and manipulated to get interesting new sounds. These, I believe, are from the mid to late 1950s, so they're not the newest. They're coming up to retirement age, and this is my retirement home for oscillators. Now, what they were originally built for is testing audio circuits, I think. I'm not an electronics engineer, so I'm not exactly sure how it works, but as far as I understand, you would use this to sweep through the frequencies while testing the response of an audio circuit, and then any problem areas could be addressed. I've just got these patched across the first 8 channels on my mixer, and I just raise and lower the faders or mute and unmute them, send them to different effects and things and pan them, and doing that you can generate some interesting textures. If you get 2 sine waves almost in tune, you also get something called a beat frequency, which is where one sine wave, because of the way the phase doesn't quite match up, cancels out part of the other one. So you end up with a kind of intermittent signal, and that can be quite a useful rhythmic tool as well. Of course, in the 1950s and even earlier, when people were starting to experiment with electronic music on tape, as opposed to musique concrète, which is the manipulation of recorded sounds using either very early vinyl record techniques, like Pierre Schaeffer did at the French radio station he worked at. Back then they would have had limited sound sources if they wanted electronic sound, and things like test equipment would have been readily available. Not exactly cheap at the time, as I understand, but affordable-ish if you saved up a lot, and certainly affordable to institutions such as universities and radio stations where studios tended to emerge. Of course, once these became a little bit obsolete and a few years later when newer things were available, you'd probably be able to pick them up very cheaply from redundant plant stores and such. And certainly this kind of thing was used a lot in early electronic music. They don't all quite work properly, but I'm not going to fix them. 5 of them work straight out the box. I've got no technical knowledge really beyond a quick Google search. I'm able to replace things like broken electrolytic capacitors and valves, but that's as far as my knowledge actually goes, and 5 out of the 8 worked. 1 of them are repaired, 2 of them make not a clean sine wave and just make a kind of crackly drone, which I've decided to leave because it's actually a very useful texture to have in the sort of music I make. They look great, and I enjoy having them here. They're probably the tool I use most apart from the tape machines. I've got quite a few bits of exotic equipment, but the building blocks of the kind of music I make, and which sort of mimics the early 1950s, 1960s electronic music, would have used simple tone generators as the basic sound, which could be then manipulated on tape, filtered, and put through various other effects. If you layer them together and mess with the amplitudes and things like that, you get very complicated textures. So I'll take you over to the mixer and I'll just give you a quick audio example of the sort of thing you can do. Like I said, I've got the oscillators patched across the channels of the mixer. Now this won't sound great because I don't know how to use the microphone properly, but should give you a rough idea. I'm fairly confident you would have heard that at least a little bit. So to play it, you can just fade things in and out. You can also use the mute buttons. Or more commonly, I'll follow the graphic score I've written and start and stop the tape as I want things. So using the stop clock I have here, I might decide I want 5 seconds on the graphic score of 440 Hertz, 260 and 1003 Hertz, something like that. So I'd get that tuned in, raise the faders, start the tape, record 5 seconds, and then depending on the beats per minute, let's keep it simple and say we're running the tape at 7.5 inches per second. 5 seconds is obviously 5 times 7.5 inches. I can then, using a tape machine, find the start of the sound by sort of scrubbing the tape back and forth across the playhead, mark it off with a Chinograph pencil, measure the length I need based on the inches per second times the number of seconds, etc., and then cut it at the end. And then you do that for hours and hours and hours and you end up with something that sounds pretty bad, but there you go, that's how it's done. Yeah, so they are quite fun to play with just live as well. You can just record a load of random mashing around on it and it sounds all right. I'll try and show you a beat frequency sound now where I've got 2 sine waves very, very slightly out of tune. So, as promised, I have 2 sine waves slightly detuned, and that sounds like this. What I'm now going to do is change the frequency on one of the units generating the sine waves to bring the difference in pitch closer together. As this happens, the phase cancellation will change, so they'll be affecting each other differently. Just to explain what that means, if you have a sine wave with a certain phase, so let's say the signal's doing this. If you have exactly the same pitch, but the phase is reversed, so down like that, in theory, in perfect conditions, if they're the same amplitude, they should perfectly cancel each other out. You should have silence. Where the phase cancels each other out in a slightly random way, or nearly does, as in the case of 2 sine waves, which are very regular sounds, you end up with this choppy beat frequency. As you bring the sounds closer together, that should slow down until eventually we hear one tone as the phases perfectly align. So there, they're almost in phase, but not quite. If we go a little bit further, it starts to increase in speed again. There you go. Rather pleasing, isn't it? So, in summary, my name's Ben, I'm 36 years old, and I think oscillators are basically a good thing.